What I would like to do is to give you a little bit of a real-world tour of a few things we attempted in this transnational education degree. If some of you were this morning at Katie's presentation, then she already gave you an idea of how the degree actually worked, but just in case. It was a 3+1 degree, so that meant that the students were 3 years in China at Nanjing, and then they came for their final year to Keele. During the second and the third year, we had flying faculty, so we delivered 6 modules with Keele staff going to Nanjing to deliver those during about 2 or 3 weeks intensive modules. And we additionally had 2 distance learning modules, so one each of those years that took the space of the whole academic year. When they came to us for their final year at Keele, they had an almost full integration to the home cohort. It wasn't complete, and I'll mention why towards the end. They did 6 of their 8 modules with the home cohort, but then they did 2 modules which were dedicated for them. They were laboratory-based modules in lieu of sort of the research project and dissertation modules that our home students do in that year. One of the things that I'll kind of want to really get across is that the key thing for us to be able to deliver this program and really support our international students in it was the sharing of best practice. We could literally not have done it without a handful of other people that helped us along the way. So at Keele, 2 key groups were really important for us. One was the NXU Ludong Teach Out group, which had essentially people from GGE, psychology and chemistry, but also from professional services in different places of the university. And we all got together to talk about anything and everything to do with those degrees. And it really helped us kind of focus on what worked and what didn't, the little issues that we had in relation to student, for example, their visa applications, their admissions to Keele for their final year, and all the little things that we don't necessarily think about as academics in terms of our international students, but that create significant amount of stress for the students. And they come to us because we are the people that they are seeing in the first place. It also helped us in terms of learning the best ways of communicating with our students and with each other. So things like WeChat or VPNs that we needed when we were in China. There are obvious communication issues when you are in China, where things that we tend to take for granted here don't necessarily work. But also that means that the students, when they're here, they don't actually know many of these systems that we take for granted our students will pick up straight away. So it's not just a language barrier, but it might be a technological barrier as well. There was also the Language Centre, which were invaluable. They ran the pre-sessional English course for our students. We interacted significantly over the summer with that, but also the year-long English module that our students had to take, and which many of our international students, whether it is through transnational degrees or just international students that come to our home programs, they are, if they don't have a significant level of English, asked to do English modules alongside their program. And what we found, it was really useful to collaborate with their English tutors and give them the knowledge of what our students were doing in their core subjects, what kind of assessments they would be undertaking, so that their English tutors could help support that kind of thing. So if they were going to be asked to do presentations, then they practice that in their English modules and so on. And also it also gave us a report on how they were doing with their English, so we could also support them within our own modules. Additionally, we had a national network. There are several universities in the UK that have transnational chemistry degrees between UK and Chinese universities. And we came together with the help of the RSC, the Royal Society of Chemistry, to share best practice, essentially. That was the key issue that we were looking at how we were doing and what we were doing. So one of the things that came out of that was that with 3 other universities, Reading, Liverpool and Sheffield, we did a study about the student expectations. So what they expected of studying in the UK before they came, and then after they came, did that match up, or were there some things that were surprising to them? We did some questionnaires and then some focus groups as well when they were here. The key concern for them when they were in China was language barrier. They were very concerned about not being able to communicate with their peers, with the academics, and just generally in everyday life. However, when they were actually here, that took a little bit of a second place to other things such as workload and independent study, which was something actually that we had learned in the Teach Out group. That was a thing. The teaching style in China is based on significant timetabled hours, significant amount of contact hours. They're not really expected to do that much work outside of contact hours. They even have timetabled hours to do kind of their homework and so on. And so they found it very difficult to adapt to here, where we are expecting them to do independent study in a lot of our subjects. So they found, or they felt that they were working harder and they had less time to do other things, which is part of the experience, part of why international students come to us, is to experience the culture, to experience other things. So they had a bit of a conflict of that, and time management then became a thing as well. One of the key issues in terms of language barrier once they were here was the fact that it then caused them to feel unable to ask for help. So they were afraid to ask their academics for help, in feeling that they wouldn't be able to be understood. Now, we were lucky when we separated the information by university. Keele students were some of the ones that felt this less, and it was because we found, one prodding them in the focus groups, was because they already knew some of us. So a key thing for them was, even with a language barrier, if they had a good relationship and significant interaction with some of their tutors, they felt more comfortable in coming to us. And we could see that just by the fact that they were coming to those of us who were flying faculty more than any other academic in the department, even to ask, normal questions about the university, about things, not necessarily the subject itself, but they felt that confidence just because they knew us a little bit better. So perhaps fostering those interactions is something important. Another approach that we took was international group work. So one of our distance learning modules was sustainable chemistry, which is also a module that is taught here at Keele to our home students. So what was done was group work that led to individual reports. So the group aspect of it wasn't necessarily linked to the assessment itself, but it got interaction between the students who were in Nanjing at the time and the students who were here at Keele at that point, but who would, in their final year, be one cohort. So started that interaction 2 years before the students came to Keele. The idea was to get them talking around sustainable issues and how that is dealt with differently in China and in the UK, as well as just fostering those interactions. Now, some of the key sort of outcomes of this group work was that the interaction was better when they were allowed to have that communication in a method or technology that they chose themselves. So the first year that Catherine ran this project, she expected them to use the Keele email as primary source of communication. Now that's a problem because it's based on Google, which in China is banned. So it created a lot of issues around how much the Chinese students could actually interact with it. The second year we suggested WeChat, which we know the Chinese students are happy to use and which was easy enough for our home students to pick up. And that kind of went on its own. There was no staff oversight on the actual interactions, but we know by what the students then said that there was significant interaction, which then lasted until the students came a couple of years later. We had some of those students who participated in these groups later act as mentors or so on in that final year. So it did have that impact, long-lasting impact in interactions, which is that kind of peer-to-peer interactions that we were talking about earlier this morning, which is key to our students. Thank you. Another project that we worked on was a TIPS funded project in which one of our concerns was how the students, because they would be taking the same modules in that final year, the difference in what their experience in the previous years had been. So we did these lecture highlights, which were essentially edited versions of lecture capture recordings, just focusing on really key aspects of the first and second year content that was relevant to third year modules that they would be taking. Some student editors worked on that, which was a really interesting project. But what was key is that we had that one key topic. It was all captioned, okay, so it had subtitles, full subtitles in English, and a little detailed slide of now you should be able to understand this or work on this and so on, so they knew what was expected of them after having watched that. And the thing that came out of this is, although we made it primarily thinking of our NXU students, it was available to all our third year students, and all the students found it useful, whether they were home student or Chinese students. And they all, or most of them, about 80% of them, found the captions useful. So not just our international students, whether the Chinese students or other international students on our program, they all found those captions particularly useful. There was comments about, for example, using it in the library where they couldn't have the volume on, or actually in places where it was really noisy and they couldn't really hear properly, and so they could just read. But also with technical words, which you might hear and not really know what the word is, once you see it written, it's a lot easier to take it in. So the two other modules that I talked about at the very beginning, once they were here, we had lab-based modules which we took really carefully with scripted labs onto research, but also had workshops that then gave them other support as well, which led to some really interesting things. But in summary, collaboration is key between academics, professional staff, technical staff. Everyone has their own role to play in supporting our international students. Sharing of best practice is key. So it is not about reinventing the wheel, but taking what has worked elsewhere and adapting it to your own program or students. And many initiatives that support international students actually help everyone else. Thank you.